My name is Claire Anderson, and am 32 years old. I was standing in my childhood home's dining room during Thanksgiving dinner when my younger sister Margot announced to 25 family members that my marriage to Garrett was a pathetic joke. The room fell into the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them just stared at me with expressions ranging from pity to cruel satisfaction. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my wine glass. Margot stood there smirking, her designer dress catching the chandelier light, while her wealthy husband Preston shifted uncomfortably in his seat beside her. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with trembling fingers and saw a text from Preston that made my blood run cold. "We need to talk. Alone. Please. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever dealt with a toxic family member, go ahead and hit that like button because you're going to want to see how this story unfolds. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because this journey gets wild. And I promise you won't want to miss a single twist." 3 hours earlier, everything had seemed almost normal, or at least as normal as things ever got in my family. Garrett and I had driven up from our home in Westchester to my parents' estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The Anderson family home sat on 5 acres of manicured lawns and gardens, a sprawling colonial that screamed old money from every white column and black shutter. My parents, Barbara and Douglas Anderson, had built their fortune in real estate development over 3 decades, and they never let anyone forget it. Barbara was the kind of woman who wore pearls to breakfast and measured people's worth by their bank statements and social connections. Douglas was quieter, always buried in business calls and investment portfolios, emotionally distant in that way wealthy fathers often are. My sister Margot was 28, 4 years younger than me, and she'd married Preston Whitfield 2 years ago in a wedding that cost more than most people's houses. Preston came from a political family, worked as a hedge fund manager, and looked perfect on paper. They lived in a penthouse in Manhattan, vacationed in the Hamptons, and their life appeared flawless from every angle. I'd married Garrett Mitchell 5 years ago, and my family had never forgiven me for it. Garrett was 34, a high school teacher and football coach who loved his job despite the modest salary. He was kind, genuine, hard-working, and made me laugh every single day. But to my family, he was evidence that I'd married down, settled for less than I deserved, thrown away my potential. They'd spent 5 years making sure I knew it through countless small cuts and casual cruelties. When we arrived that Thanksgiving morning, Barbara greeted us at the door with air kisses that didn't quite touch my cheeks and a tight smile for Garrett. She was already dressed in an expensive cream suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, every inch the society matron. Douglas barely looked up from his phone when we entered, offering a distracted wave from the living room where he sat near the fireplace. The house smelled like roasting turkey, and the expensive candles Barbara special ordered from some boutique in Manhattan, everything orchestrated to create the image of a perfect American Thanksgiving. Margot and Preston arrived an hour later in Preston's sleek black Mercedes, and the difference in my parents' reception was stark and painful. Barbara practically ran to the door, gushing over Margot's outfit, cooing over her new diamond bracelet that caught the light with every movement of her wrist. Douglas actually stood up, shook Preston's hand with genuine warmth, asked about his latest business deals. Margot looked stunning as always, wearing a designer dress in deep burgundy that probably cost more than our mortgage payment. Her dark hair styled in perfect waves, makeup flawless. She hugged me, and I tried not to notice how her eyes scanned my outfit, with barely concealed disdain. I was wearing a nice dress from a department store, perfectly appropriate. But next to Margot, I always felt like a discount version of myself. When dinner was served, Barbara's careful seating arrangement spoke volumes about the family hierarchy. The dining room table could seat 30 people easily, and Barbara had placed Margot and Preston at the places of honor, closest to her and Douglas at the heads of the table. Garrett and I were relegated to the far end, squeezed in near my younger cousins and their children, as if we were part of the kids' table. I caught Garrett's eye across the sterling silver and crystal, and he gave me a small, supportive smile, that made my chest ache with love and sadness. He was trying so hard to make this bearable, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. The subtle digs started almost immediately. Margot, loud enough for half the table to hear, asked if public school teachers got Black Friday off or if Garrett had to go back to work tomorrow. Her tone was bright and curious, as if it were an innocent question, but the implication was clear. Teaching wasn't a real profession, not like Preston's important work in finance. Garrett answered evenly that yes, he had the weekend off, and he was planning to help me prep for a big client presentation I had on Monday. I squeezed his hand under the table, grateful for his composure. My Uncle Richard, Barbara's older brother and a real estate mogul in his own right, leaned forward to ask about my little marketing job with the kind of condescension that made my teeth clench. I actually owned my own digital marketing consultancy, and it was doing quite well, but my family had always dismissed it as a hobby, something to keep me busy while Garrett's salary supposedly supported us. Before I could answer Uncle Richard, Margot interrupted with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, Claire's playing businesswoman while Garrett plays with balls all day." The double meaning was intentional, crude, and several people around the table laughed. I felt my face burn with humiliation, felt Garrett's hand tighten around mine. He started to stand up, his jaw clenched, and I knew he was going to defend himself, but Margot cut him off smoothly. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. God, you can't say anything around some people." She rolled her eyes dramatically. And just like that, Shed made Garrett look like the problem, the one who couldn't take a joke, the one who was too touchy. I pulled him back down into his seat, whispering, "Please, don't give them the satisfaction." He sat, but I could feel him vibrating with anger beside me. And I'd never loved him more, or felt more ashamed of my family. As dessert was being served, Margot stood up with her wine glass, tapping it lightly with her fork to get everyone's attention. The conversation died down, and all eyes turned to her. I assumed she was going to announce a pregnancy, which would have been very on brand for Margot, another way to prove her life was perfect. Instead, she launched into what can only be described as a prepared speech about what real success looks like. She talked about hard work and smart choices, and finding a partner who could match your ambitions. She compared her penthouse apartment with its view of Central Park to what she called more modest suburban living situations, while looking directly at me. She mentioned Preston's recent six-figure bonus from his firm, while noting that some people scrape by on teacher salaries and side hustles with a sympathetic head tilt that made me want to throw my dessert plate at her face. Every word was chosen carefully, designed to humiliate without being so overt that anyone would call her out. She was an expert at this, had been practicing on me our whole lives. I could feel every eye in that room on me, could feel the weight of their judgment and pity. Some faces showed discomfort, like Diane Whitfield, Preston's mother, who looked genuinely distressed by Margot's performance. But most of the family members were nodding along, some even smiling as if Margot were sharing important life wisdom rather than publicly eviscerating her own sister. Barbara watched with an expression of pride, as if Margot were giving a valedictorian speech rather than a cruel dissertation on my failures. Douglas stared at his pumpkin pie, saying nothing, doing nothing, as he always did when things got uncomfortable. My cousin Whitney caught my eye from across the table and actually had the audacity to give me a sympathetic smile that somehow felt even worse than outright mockery. Then Margot went for the kill. She revealed that she knew about the loan I'd taken from our parents last year, information that someone in this room must have shared with her. The circumstances were complicated and private. My business had experienced a temporary cash flow issue during the pandemic, when several major clients delayed payments simultaneously. I'd borrowed $20,000 from my parents as a bridge loan, and I'd paid them back in full, with interest, within 6 months. It was a sound business decision, the kind of thing that happens to entrepreneurs all the time. But Margot twisted it into something shameful and desperate. My sister had to come begging to Mommy and Daddy because her husband can't provide for her, she announced with mock sadness, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Garrett stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. His face was red, his fists clenched at his sides, and I saw genuine rage in his eyes for the first time in our marriage. I grabbed his arm, my nails digging in, and whispered desperately that he shouldn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. He looked down at me, and I saw the moment he decided to listen. Saw him swallow his anger and pride for my sake, even though every muscle in his body wanted to fight back. The family piled on like sharks smelling blood in the water. My cousin Whitney, married to a successful surgeon and never shy about mentioning it, chimed in about how important it was to have a partner who could really provide security. My Aunt Margaret sighed heavily and said something about poor Claire's choices with a head shake. Barbara didn't defend me, didn't say a single word to stop this. Instead, she actually nodded along, as if agreeing with every horrible thing being said about her own daughter. Douglas continued to study his dessert plate as if it held the secrets of the universe, offering me nothing, not even eye contact. The only person who seemed genuinely uncomfortable was Preston himself, who'd gone pale and kept shifting in his seat, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I tried to defend myself, tried to speak up with my voice shaking and tears threatening to spill. I attempted to explain the truth about the loan, the business context, the fact that Id paid it back with interest. But Margot talked right over me, her voice louder and more confident than mine could ever be in this room. "Always making excuses," she said with a dismissive wave. Then she revealed something even more private, something Id told her in confidence during a rare moment when I thought we were actually being sisters. She told everyone that Garrett and I had tried IVF last year and it had failed. That loss had been devastating. A grief I was still processing. A wound still raw. Margot looked around the table and said with a small, cruel smile, "Maybe it's nature's way of saying some people shouldn't reproduce. Not everyone is cut out for parenthood, especially when they can barely take care of themselves." The room gasped. Even Barbara looked shocked at that level of cruelty, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Aunt Margaret's mouth fell open. Several people looked genuinely appalled, but the damage was done. The words were out there, hanging in the air like poison. I felt something break inside me, some final thread of hope that my family might ever truly love me or accept my choices. I stood up from the table without a word, my napkin falling from my lap to the floor. I walked out of that dining room with as much dignity as I could gather, my head held high even as tears started streaming down my face. I could hear Garrett behind me, his chair scraping, his voice raised for the first time, telling the family exactly what he thought of them. I heard my mother gasp, heard Uncle Richard sputter, heard Margot's laugh, and then I heard the front door slam as Garrett stormed out. I was alone with these people, and Id never felt more abandoned in my life, even though I understood exactly why Garrett had left. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom, the fancy guest one that Barbara kept stocked with expensive soaps and monogrammed towels that no one was actually supposed to use. I sat on the closed toilet lid and let myself cry. Really cry. The kind of sobbing that makes your whole body shake. My mascara ran in black streams down my face, and I didn't care. I could hear raised voices downstairs, Garrett's among them, telling my family things that probably needed to be said but would make everything worse. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. Garrett had left. Had actually left me here with these people. Rationally, I understood. Had reached his breaking point, and staying would have meant saying things we couldn't take back or maybe even doing something we'd regret. But emotionally, sitting alone in that bathroom with my ruined makeup and shattered dignity, I felt abandoned. There was a soft knock on the door, gentle and tentative. I almost didn't answer, but then a kind voice said, "Claire, honey, it's Diane, Preston's mother." I unlocked the door, and she slipped inside, closing it quietly behind her. Diane Whitfield was everything my mother wasn't. She was warm and genuine, with soft edges and a real smile. She wore a simple dress and comfortable shoes, and she looked at me with actual compassion as she took in my tear-stained face. Without a word, she wet a washcloth with warm water and helped me clean up my makeup, gentle as if I were a child. She sat down on the edge of the bathtub and patted the spot next to her, and I found myself sitting there, shoulder to shoulder with this woman, who was practically a stranger, but showing me more kindness than my own mother had in years. Margot isn't what she seems, Diane said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Preston is miserable, Claire. Absolutely miserable. I looked at her in confusion, because from the outside, Margot and Preston's marriage looked perfect. They had everything: money, status, a beautiful home, successful careers. Diane shook her head as if reading my thoughts. Perfection is often performance, dear. What people show the world and what happens behind closed doors are very different things. She didn't elaborate, just squeezed my hand and told me I was stronger than I knew, that I should be proud of the life it built, that real happiness mattered more than appearances. Then she hugged me, a real hug, the kind my own mother hadn't given me in longer than I could remember. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making both of us jump slightly. I pulled it out and saw a text from Preston. We need to talk. Alone. Please. Diane saw it too, saw his name on my screen, and something flickered across her face, something knowing and sad. You should hear what he has to say, she told me, her voice heavy with meaning I didn't quite understand. I was suspicious immediately, wondering if this was another setup, another trap designed to humiliate me further. Maybe this was all part of some elaborate plan, get me alone so Margot could accuse me of trying to steal her husband. I told Diane I was going to ignore it, that I just wanted to find Garrett and leave this nightmare behind us. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and headed downstairs to find my coat and purse so I could escape. But as I passed by the partially open door of my father's study, I heard my mother's voice and froze. She was on the phone with someone, and her words stopped me cold. Yes, Margot handled it perfectly. Claire needed to be taken down a peg. She's always been so proud of that little business of hers, acting like she's some kind of entrepreneur. And Garrett, God, he's dragging her down to his level. She could have done so much better if she'd just listened to me. The person on the other end said something I couldn't hear, and Barbara laughed, actually laughed. Well, maybe now she'll realize her place in this family. Maybe now she'll stop acting like she's better than her circumstances. I stood there in the hallway, one hand pressed against the wall to steady myself, trying to process what I was hearing. My own mother had orchestrated my public humiliation with Margot. This wasn't just Margot being cruel on her own. This was planned, coordinated, a deliberate attack designed to destroy my credibility and my dignity in front of the entire family. Barbara had wanted me shamed, had wanted me to know my place, had weaponized my own sister against me. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Whatever hope had been carrying that my mother loved me, that this family could be fixed, that blood meant something beyond shared DNA, it died right there in that hallway. My heart didn't just break. It shattered into so many pieces I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to put it back together. I found Garrett sitting in our car in the circular driveway, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking in a way that told me he was either crying or trying very hard not to. I opened the passenger door and slid in beside him, and we sat there in silence for a long moment, both of us processing the worst Thanksgiving either of us had ever experienced. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were red and his jaw was tight with fury. He told me he wanted to cut off all contact with my family, that he never wanted to see or speak to any of them again, that they were toxic and cruel and he was done pretending otherwise. I felt torn in a way that made my chest ache. Despite everything, despite the humiliation and the cruelty and the betrayal I'd just discovered, they were still my family. Some stupid, stubborn part of me still hoped that somehow, someday, they might change or see me differently or love me the way I needed to be loved. Garrett and I had our first real fight right there in that car. His voice rose as he told me I kept going back for more abuse, kept giving them opportunities to hurt me, kept hoping for something that was never going to happen. I got defensive, my voice shaking as I insisted they were my family. That you don't just cut off your family. That maybe I was partly to blame for being too sensitive. Garrett looked at me with something like disbelief and pain mixed together. Your family, he said, his voice breaking. Our future kids would be your family. These people in that house are poison, Claire. They're killing you slowly. And you keep drinking it down and asking for more. The drive home was 2 hours of thick, painful silence. I cried quietly, staring out the window at the dark highway, while Garrett gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. Both of us were hurt. Both of us were angry. And for the first time in our 5-year marriage, I felt a real distance between us, a crack in our foundation. I checked my phone and saw 7 missed calls from Preston and multiple texts. There was also a message from Margot that made my stomach turn. Hope you learned your lesson tonight. Know your place. I read it 3 times, each time feeling my sadness transform into something colder and harder. Anger. Real, clean, focused anger. We pulled into our driveway just after midnight. Our house looked small and ordinary compared to my parents' estate, but it was ours, bought with our own money, decorated with our own choices, filled with actual love instead of performance and cruelty. Garrett didn't follow me to our bedroom. He grabbed a pillow and went to the guest room without a word, and I heard the door close with a soft click that somehow hurt more than if he'd slammed it. I sat on our bed in the dark, still wearing my dress, and felt my marriage cracking under the pressure my family had put on it. All of Margot's cruel words echoed in my head. Was I holding Garrett back? Should I have married someone wealthier, someone more appropriate, someone my family would approve of? I hated myself for even thinking it, but the thoughts came anyway, intrusive and painful. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I listened to Preston's voicemail, the last one had left around 11. His voice sounded urgent, almost desperate, completely different from his usual polished tone. Claire, I'm so sorry about tonight. You don't understand what's really happening. Margot is. I can't say this in a message. Please meet me tomorrow. There's a Starbucks on Main Street in your town. I looked it up. 10 in the morning, please. You deserve to know the truth about what your sister really is. I played it 3 times, trying to understand what truth he could possibly have that would matter now. What could be worse than what had already happened? Part of me wanted to delete it and block his number. But another part of me, the part that was tired of being the victim, the part that was angry and hurt and done with being pushed around, decided I would go. If nothing else, it'd tell him to leave me alone and stay out of my life. I walked into the Starbucks at exactly 10 in the morning, my eyes scanning the crowded coffee shop for Preston. I spotted him in a back corner booth, and I almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't the polished, put-together man from Thanksgiving dinner. His face was unshaven, his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it, his hair uncombed, his eyes bloodshot and exhausted. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw me, he stood up halfway, then sat back down, nervous and uncertain in a way I'd never seen him be. I walked over and slid into the booth across from him, my arms crossed, my expression cold. You have 5 minutes, I told him, and I meant it. Preston didn't waste time with pleasantries or apologies. He looked me straight in the eye and said, Margot is having an affair. She's been cheating on me for 8 months. I felt the world tilt slightly, felt my assumptions about reality shift. I asked who, though part of me didn't want to know. Preston's jaw clenched. Your cousin Bradley, Barbara's nephew, Uncle Richard's son, married to Simone with 2 young kids. Bradley, who'd been at Thanksgiving dinner sitting with his wife and children, acting completely normal, laughing at jokes, asking for seconds of turkey. Preston pulled out his phone and started showing me evidence. Photos of Margot and Bradley kissing outside hotels. Credit card statements showing charges at restaurants and luxury stores. Gifts that Preston had never received. Text messages between them that were explicit and cruel and made me feel sick to read. Preston explained that he'd hired a private investigator 2 months ago after finding suspicious charges on their joint credit card. The investigator had provided him with a thick folder of evidence, documentation of an affair that had been going on right under his nose while he worked 70-hour weeks to provide the lifestyle Margot demanded. But it went deeper than just infidelity. Preston's voice cracked as he told me that Margot had married him for his money and his family connections, that Shed never loved him, that their entire marriage was a transaction. In private, away from family and friends, she was verbally abusive. She called him weak and boring and stupid. She controlled everything about his life, from what he wore to who he could be friends with to what charity events he attended. Shed isolated him from his own family, made him feel like he was lucky Shed chosen him, like he should be grateful for her presence in his life. I sat there processing this information, trying to reconcile the perfect image Margot projected with what Preston was describing. He looked broken, sitting across from me in this coffee shop, admitting that his perfect marriage was actually a prison. I was too proud to admit I'd made a mistake, he said quietly. Too embarrassed to tell anyone that my wife treated me like garbage behind closed doors. Everyone thought we were perfect. I asked the question that was burning in my mind. Why was he telling me this now? What did he want from me? Preston leaned forward, his voice urgent and intense. Yesterday wasn't random cruelty, Claire. It was strategic. Margot is planning ahead. He explained that Head told Margot 2 weeks ago that he wanted a divorce, that he had evidence of her affair, that he was done with the marriage. Margot had smiled at him and told him that if he tried to divorce her, she would claim he was the abusive one, that Head been unfaithful, that Head threatened her. She would take him for everything he had and destroy his reputation in the process. But she needed insurance. She needed to make sure that if anyone in the family tried to defend Preston or question her version of events, they wouldn't be believed. So she decided to destroy my credibility first. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach as understanding dawned. Margot knew that I was close enough to see the truth, that I might defend Preston if things got ugly. So she orchestrated my public humiliation at Thanksgiving, with Barbara's help, to make sure the family saw me as unreliable, as bitter, as jealous of Margot's success. That way, when the divorce happened, and I tried to tell people what Preston had told me, no one would believe me. They'd think I was just being vindictive, trying to drag Margot down because of my own failures. It was brilliant in its cruelty, calculated and cold. Preston looked at me with desperate eyes. I'm asking for your help. I have evidence, but I need someone on my side when this goes public. I need someone who'll tell the truth about what Margot is really like. I know I'm asking a lot after everything you've been through, but Claire, you're the only person in that family who might actually have the courage to stand up to her. I felt conflicted, torn between self-preservation and justice. Helping Preston would mean going to war with my entire family. It would mean choosing sides in a battle that would get ugly and public and devastating. But I thought about Margot's smirk at Thanksgiving, about my mother's phone conversation, about Bradley's poor wife Simone, who probably had no idea her husband was cheating. I thought about every time Margot had hurt me and gotten away with it, every time my family had chosen her over me. Preston slid a USB drive across the table. All the evidence is on here. Photos, texts, financial records, everything. Look at it. Think about it. Talk to Garrett. Then decide if you'll help me. He stood to leave, then paused and looked back at me. They destroyed you yesterday, Claire. You don't owe them anything. Not loyalty, not silence, nothing. He walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting there with a USB drive full of secrets and a choice that would change everything. I drove home with the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket, my mind racing with everything Preston had told me. When I walked through the front door, I found Garrett in our bedroom with a duffel bag open on the bed, throwing clothes into it. My heart stopped. I asked if he was leaving me, and the words came out small and terrified. Garrett looked up, and I saw pain in his eyes but not anger. I'm going to stay at Theo's place for a few days, he said, referring to his best friend from college. We both need space to think. Last night was bad, Claire. We said things, felt things. I just need some time to clear my head. I broke down and told him everything Preston had revealed, the words tumbling out in a rush. Garrett's immediate reaction was suspicion. He sat down on the bed, the packing forgotten, and said this could all be manipulation, another trap, another way to hurt me. Margot could be playing both of us, using Preston to get to me somehow. I showed him the USB drive, and together we plugged it into my laptop and started going through the files. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. There were hundreds of photos taken by Preston's private investigator. Margot and Bradley kissing in parking lots, going into hotels together, having intimate dinners in restaurants far from Connecticut where they thought no one would recognize them. The timestamps went back 8 months, documenting a sustained and deliberate affair. The credit card statements showed a pattern of Margot spending Preston's money on gifts for Bradley. Expensive watches, designer clothes, hotel rooms, dinners that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. The text messages between Margot and Bradley were explicit and cruel. They mocked Preston, calling him boring and pathetic. Margot had written, "Preston is basically just an ATM machine that I occasionally have to sleep with. Can't wait until I take him for everything and we can actually be together openly." Bradley had responded with equally cruel messages, detailing how much he looked forward to leaving Simone once Margot had secured her divorce settlement. They talked about Preston and Simone like they were obstacles to be managed rather than human beings whose lives they were destroying. There was even video footage, grainy but clear enough, of Margot and Bradley in what appeared to be Bradley's office after hours, intimate in ways that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Garrett watched in silence, his jaw clenched tighter with each new piece of evidence. When we finally finished going through everything, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your sister is a sociopath," he said flatly. "This isn't just an affair. This is calculated, cruel, predatory." We talked for hours about whether to help Preston, whether getting involved would drag us deeper into the family toxicity we were trying to escape. Garrett worried about the toll it would take on me, on us, on our marriage that was already strained from the Thanksgiving disaster. But he also said something that stuck with me. She needs to face consequences. She can't just destroy people and walk away untouched. Someone has to stand up to her. We decided to sleep on it, to give ourselves 24 hours before making any decisions. But the next morning, I woke up to my phone exploding with notifications. 53 messages, comments, and tags across various social media platforms and family group chats. Margot had struck first. Shed posted on the family group chat and on her Facebook page, where several family members were friends with her, claiming that I had tried to seduce Preston at Thanksgiving dinner. Shed written a long, detailed post about how uncomfortable Preston had been around me, how Eid made inappropriate comments and advances, how Shed tried to brush it off as holiday drinking, but now felt she needed to speak out to protect her marriage. She painted herself as the victim, the faithful wife defending her relationship against her jealous, unstable sister, who couldn't handle seeing other people happy. The family members were already commenting, already believing her. Barbara had written, "I'm so disappointed in you, Claire, after everything we've given you." Whitney had commented, "I always knew Claire was jealous of Margot's success. This is so sad." Uncle Richard had posted, "This is why family events become complicated. Some people can't handle other people's happiness." I scrolled through comment after comment, watching my reputation get destroyed in real time. Some of my own friends from high school who were friends with Margot on social media were seeing these posts, sending me confused messages asking what was going on. The humiliation from Thanksgiving had been bad, but this was worse. This was public, permanent, searchable. Margot was systematically destroying my credibility and my name. Garrett read over my shoulder, his fury building with each comment. "We have to fight back," he said, his voice hard and determined. "Now, we can't let her get away with this." I realized Preston had been right. Margot had planned this perfectly. She'd known I might learn the truth about her affair, so she'd preemptively destroyed my credibility. Now if I tried to expose her, everyone would think I was just being vindictive, trying to hurt her because she'd caught me trying to seduce her husband. It was masterful in its cruelty, and I felt a cold rage settle over me. I looked at Garrett and nodded. "Call Preston. Tell him we're in. Tell him we're going to burn her whole world down." 2 days later, Garrett and I sat in a conference room at the law offices of Judith Ross, one of Manhattan's top divorce attorneys. Preston had hired her, and she had a reputation for handling high-profile cases with precision and ruthlessness. Judith was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an expensive suit, and she radiated competence and control. She reviewed Preston's evidence carefully, making notes on a legal pad, asking specific questions about dates and documentation. When she finished, she looked up at us and said, "This is substantial evidence of adultery. But we need more if we're going to protect Preston's assets and reputation in court. Margot will claim the photos are doctored, the texts are fabricated. We need witnesses, financial forensics, and a pattern of behavior that can't be disputed." That's when Judith revealed something that changed everything. Bradley's wife, Simone, had already contacted her office 3 weeks ago. Simone had found evidence of the affair months earlier and had quietly hired her own private investigator. She had her own dossier of evidence, her own documentation of the betrayal. Simone wanted to coordinate with Preston, to take down both cheaters together, to make sure neither Margot nor Bradley could walk away from this unscathed. The thought of meeting Simone filled me with anxiety and sympathy. I'd seen her at Thanksgiving, sitting with her 2 children, smiling and passing the rolls, having no idea that 20 feet away, her husband's mistress was publicly humiliating me while sleeping with Simone's husband behind her back. When I met Simone at a quiet restaurant the next day, I found a woman who reminded me of myself. She was around my age, tired-looking, with kind eyes that held a deep sadness. We sat across from each other, and she told me her story. She'd found hotel receipts in Bradley's car 6 months ago and had suspected something was wrong. She'd hired an investigator and learned the truth about Margot and Bradley's affair. She'd been gathering evidence, consulting with lawyers, trying to figure out the best way to protect her children from the fallout. We bonded over coffee and shared pain. 2 women betrayed by people who were supposed to love us, both of us trying to figure out how to rebuild our lives from the rubble. Judith's forensic accountant discovered something even worse than the affair. Margot had been embezzling money from Preston, systematically and deliberately. She'd set up shell companies in her name, forged Preston's signature on documents, and transferred over $300,000 to accounts that were ultimately controlled by Bradley. This wasn't just infidelity. This was fraud, financial abuse, potentially criminal behavior that could result in actual charges. Preston sat in Judith's office and looked physically ill as the accountant explained the paper trail. "I trusted her with everything," he said, his voice hollow. "I gave her access to all our accounts. I never thought she would steal from me. The investigation revealed something that made my blood run cold. My mother Barbara had known about the affair. Text messages between Barbara and Margot, recovered from phone records through legal channels, showed that Barbara had been actively helping Margot hide money and plan for the divorce. Barbara had consulted with her own lawyer about the best ways to protect Margot's assets, had advised her on how to make herself look sympathetic, had helped coordinate the Thanksgiving attack. One text from Barbara to Margot read, "Don't worry, darling. Claire's too weak to be a problem. I raised her to be compliant. She'll never fight back." Reading those words, seeing my own mother's contempt for me spelled out in black and white, made me feel physically sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, while Garrett stood outside the stall asking if I was okay, his voice tight with fury. I had a choice to make, and it was perhaps the most important choice of my life. I could walk away. I could protect myself, keep my head down, let Preston and Simone fight their own battles while Garrett and I tried to rebuild our lives away from all this toxicity. Or I could fight. I could expose everything, burn it all down, make sure Margot and Bradley and Barbara faced consequences for what they'd done. Garrett told me he'd support whatever I decided, that my well-being was more important to him than revenge. But I thought about that bathroom at Thanksgiving, about crying alone while my family laughed downstairs. I thought about every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every time it'd been made to feel small and worthless. I looked at Garrett and said, "Let's destroy them." We spent the next week building our case. Preston would file for divorce with fraud charges attached, seeking criminal investigation. Simone would file for divorce from Bradley simultaneously. Both divorce packets would include comprehensive evidence folders, fully documented and legally vetted. Judith coordinated with Simone's lawyer to make sure the timing was perfect. We compiled a distribution list that included every family member, extended family, family friends, members of Barbara and Douglas Country Club, Preston's employer for ethics review, and Bradley's employer. This wasn't going to be a quiet divorce. This was going to be a public reckoning. I spent hours writing my own statement, detailing everything that had happened at Thanksgiving, explaining the truth about the loan I'd repaid, exposing Barbara's involvement in the conspiracy against me, attaching irrefutable evidence of Margot's affair and fraud. I wrote about the pain of being humiliated by my own family, about the lies Margot had spread about me trying to seduce Preston, about the systematic destruction of my reputation to hide her own crimes. Garrett read every draft, helped me refine the language, made sure I stayed factual and calm rather than emotional and accusatory. We copied everything to multiple drives, documented every step, made sure we had backups of backups. The subject line of my email was simple and direct: the truth about Margot and what really happened. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold, clear sunshine that makes everything feel surreal. At exactly 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Preston filed for divorce in Manhattan Supreme Court. The filing included fraud charges, a request for criminal investigation, and a motion to freeze all joint assets. At the same moment, Simone filed for divorce from Bradley in Connecticut Family Court. Both packets, thick with evidence and documentation, were sent via certified mail and email to our carefully compiled distribution list. Every person who'd been at that Thanksgiving dinner received a packet. Every member of the extended family. Every friend of Barbara and Douglas who ran in their social circles. The country club where they held membership. Preston's employer, who took ethics violations seriously. Bradley's employer, a prestigious law firm. The net we cast was wide and deliberate. I sat at my laptop with Garrett beside me, his hand on my shoulder, and I hit send on the email I'd crafted to the entire family. The evidence attachments took a moment to upload. Megabytes of photos and documents and financial records. I included a chronological breakdown of Margot's deception, starting with her affair and ending with the Thanksgiving attack that had been designed to preemptively destroy my credibility. I explained Barbara's involvement, the texts showing her knowledge and complicity, the way Shed helped coordinate my public humiliation to protect Margot's future. I laid it all out with dates and facts and irrefutable proof. Then I closed my laptop and waited. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing within minutes, calls from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were apologetic, horrified by what they'd learned. Aunt Lorraine called crying, saying Shed had no idea, that she was so sorry for how I'd been treated. Some of my cousins sent texts saying they'd always thought something was off about Margot's behavior, that they should have stood up for me. But others were defensive and angry. Uncle Richard called to yell at me for airing family business publicly, for destroying family unity, for betraying blood. I let it go to voicemail. I was done explaining myself to people who would never understand. Douglas called around noon, his voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. "What have you done to this family?" he asked, and he sounded genuinely broken. I felt a moment of sympathy before I remembered him sitting silently at Thanksgiving while Margot eviscerated me. I told the truth, I said calmly. Margot and Mother destroyed this family. I just exposed it. If you want to be angry at someone, be angry at them. There was a long silence on the line, and then Douglas said quietly, "I didn't know about the affair. I didn't know Barbara was involved in setting you up. I swear, Claire, I didn't know." Then he hung up, and I wondered if I believed him. Margot's reaction was explosive. She called me screaming so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. The words were barely coherent. A stream of profanity and accusations. "You bitter, jealous bitch. You've always wanted what I have. You've always been jealous that I'm more successful, more beautiful, more everything." I waited for her to run out of steam, and then I said quietly, "I never wanted your life, Margot. I never wanted your marriage or your money or your empty, cruel existence. I just wanted my sister to love me." There was a moment of shocked silence, and then Margot laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "Love you? You were always weak, pathetic, disappointing. This won't work, Claire. Everyone will still believe me over you. I took a deep breath. Then explain the bank records showing you embezzling Preston's money. Explain the photos of you and Bradley. Explain the text messages. Explain everything, Margot, because the whole family has the evidence now. She threatened to sue me for defamation, to destroy me, but her voice had lost its confidence, and we both knew she had no ground to stand on. She hung up. Bradley's family was imploding in real time. His parents, Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Richard, called me together, Lorraine crying so hard she could barely speak. "Is this real?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Did Bradley really do this?" With Margot, I told her I was sorry, that I wished it weren't true, that Simone had even more evidence if she wanted to see it. Uncle Richard was furious, but not at me. He was furious at Bradley, at Margot, at Barbara for hiding it. He declared that he was cutting Barbara out of their business partnerships, that he wanted nothing to do with anyone who would condone this kind of betrayal. The Anderson family business empire, built over decades, fractured along the fault lines of this scandal. Barbara showed up at my house that afternoon, unannounced and unwelcome. Garrett answered the door and tried to send her away, but Barbara pushed past him with an aggression he'd never seen from my always composed mother. She looked terrible. Her makeup smeared, her hair uncombed, her expensive clothes wrinkled. "How dare you destroy your sister?" she screamed at me in my own living room. I stood there calmly and asked her how she dared to orchestrate my public humiliation. Barbara tried to deny it, but I pulled out my phone and played the recording. It made that Thanksgiving night, her voice clear as she talked about taking me down a peg, about how I needed to know my place. Her face went white as she listened to her own words played back to her. She tried one last desperate attack, the only weapon she had left. "You'll get nothing from us. You're out of the will. You'll never inherit a single dollar from this family." I looked at her, this woman who'd given birth to me but had never truly been a mother, and I felt nothing but pity. "I don't want your blood money, Barbara. I don't want anything from you. I want you to leave my house and never contact me again unless you're ready to genuinely apologize, which I know you'll never do." She stared at me, shocked that I was standing up to her, that I wasn't crying or begging or backing down. Then she turned and left, slamming my front door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. The family split into factions almost immediately. Some sided with me, Preston, and Simone, recognizing the evidence and the truth. Douglas, after seeing all the documentation, quietly filed for separation from Barbara, unable to forgive her involvement in the conspiracy. Diane Whitfield became a genuine friend, checking on me regularly, offering support to her son. Several cousins reached out to apologize and distance themselves from Margot and Barbara, but others sided with Margot and Barbara, either out of loyalty or denial or their own complicity. Whitney continued to defend Margot on social media until the evidence became too overwhelming to ignore. Aunt Margaret stood by Barbara, claiming family should protect family no matter what. The Anderson family, once united by wealth and status and carefully maintained appearances, shattered into pieces that would never fit back together. Preston texted me late that night. "Thank you. I'm finally free because of you." I realized he was right, and the freedom went both ways. I was free from the need for my family's approval, free from hoping they'd change, free from the painful cycle of seeking love from people who'd never truly offered it. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn something that should have been given freely, and I was done. 3 months passed, and the legal and emotional dust began to settle into new patterns. Preston's divorce was finalized with remarkable speed once the fraud evidence was presented. Margot was facing criminal charges for embezzlement, and her lawyers were working on a plea bargain that would likely involve restitution, probation, and a permanent criminal record. She lost everything in the divorce settlement: the penthouse, the cars, the designer wardrobe, the social status she'd married for. Her reputation in Manhattan social circles was destroyed beyond repair. Bradley also finalized his divorce, lost custody of his children except for supervised visits, and was fired from his law firm for ethics violations. The two people who'd thought they could have it all ended up with nothing but each other and a future filled with legal consequences. Barbara faced potential criminal charges as an accessory to the fraud, though her expensive lawyers were fighting to keep her out of jail. What she couldn't fight was the social exile. The country club quietly asked her to resign her membership. Her longtime friends stopped calling, stopped inviting her to events, distanced themselves from the scandal. Douglas did divorce her, and in the settlement, he was remarkably generous to me, setting up a trust fund for future grandchildren and making it clear that whatever happened between him and me moving forward, I would never want for financial security. He was trying, in his quiet, emotionally limited way, to make amends. I was cautious with him, but I allowed phone calls, occasional dinners, small steps toward rebuilding something that might eventually resemble a functional relationship. Margot moved to California shortly after her plea deal was finalized, cutting off contact with almost everyone in the family. She sent me one email, short and bitter, saying I'd won and hoping I was happy with destroying her life. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say to her. Sometimes I felt sad about losing my sister, but then I'd remember she'd never really been a sister to me, just a competitor who saw me as someone to defeat rather than someone to love. My own life transformed in ways I couldn't have predicted. My business actually thrived in the aftermath of the scandal. Several family members who'd previously dismissed my work became clients, impressed by the strength and strategic thinking I'd shown during the crisis. Word spread in certain circles about what had happened, and I gained a reputation for being someone who didn't back down, who fought for truth even when it was costly. Garrett and I not only survived the strain on our marriage but came out stronger. We renewed our vows in a small ceremony at a beach in Maine, surrounded by real friends and the family members who actually cared about us. We spoke our promises to each other again, and this time, they felt even more meaningful because we'd been tested and hadn't broken. The IVF worked on our second attempt. I was 12 weeks pregnant now, just starting to show, carrying a daughter we'd already decided to name Hope. Garrett cried when we found out, happy tears this time, and we both felt like maybe all the pain had led us somewhere better. We talked about what kind of parents we wanted to be, how we'd make sure our daughter knew she was loved unconditionally, how we'd never use affection as a weapon, or compare her to others or make her feel like she had to earn our approval. We'd break the cycle that Barbara had perpetuated, create something healthier and kinder. Preston and I became genuine friends, bonded by trauma and mutual support. There was never anything romantic between us, but we understood each other in ways few people could. He started dating one of Garrett's colleagues, a warm and genuine woman who taught English at the high school, and I'd never seen him look more relaxed or happy. He donated a substantial amount of money to Garrett's school for new athletic equipment and scholarships, and he volunteered as a guest speaker for the business classes, sharing real-world financial knowledge with students who might not otherwise have access to that information. He was building a life based on authenticity rather than appearance, and it suited him. Simone became one of my closest friends. We met monthly for coffee, and we'd formed a support group for women dealing with family betrayal and infidelity. I occasionally spoke at the meetings, sharing my story, and I was always amazed by how many women had similar experiences, how common it was to be hurt by the people who were supposed to love you most. There was healing in the shared stories, in knowing we weren't alone in our pain. I spent a lot of time in therapy, processing my childhood and my relationship with Barbara. My therapist helped me understand that Barbara was likely a narcissist who saw her children as extensions of herself rather than separate people with their own needs and worth. Margot had been the golden child, showered with approval as long as she reflected well on Barbara. I'd been the scapegoat, the one who could never do anything right, the one who existed to make the golden child look better by comparison. Understanding the pattern didn't make it hurt less, but it helped me stop blaming myself, stop thinking I could have done something differently to earn Barbara's love. The problem had never been me. It had been her inability to love in a healthy way. I ran into Margot by accident one afternoon in Manhattan. I was there for a client meeting, and I stopped at a coffee shop near Grand Central. She walked in while I was waiting for my latte, and we both froze. She looked different, diminished somehow. Her expensive clothes were gone, replaced with ordinary jeans and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. The arrogance and superiority that had always surrounded her like armor were gone, leaving behind someone who looked tired and uncertain. We stood there for a moment, and then she walked over. "You won," she said, her voice flat. It wasn't an apology, just a statement of fact. I looked at her, this person who'd tormented me for so many years, and I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction or triumph, but sadness. "It was never a competition, Margot," I told her. "I just wanted a sister. I just wanted you to love me." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, might finally acknowledge what she'd done. But then she looked away and said, "I have to go." She walked out of the coffee shop, and I watched her disappear into the Manhattan crowds. I realized I no longer needed an apology from her, or closure, or acknowledgement. I'd found peace without any of those things. The biggest lesson I learned through all of this was that silence enables abusers. For years, I'd stayed quiet about how my family treated me, made excuses for their behavior, convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. That silence had only made things worse, had given people like Margot and Barbara permission to keep hurting me. Standing up for yourself isn't cruel or vindictive. It's necessary. It's self-preservation. It's drawing a line and saying this far and no further. I also learned that people who truly love you won't require you to shrink or diminish yourself to make them feel better. Garrett had never asked me to be less intelligent, less ambitious, less myself. He celebrated my successes and supported me through failures and loved me on my good days and my bad days. That's what real love looked like, and it was so different from what I'd grown up thinking love was supposed to be. I'd thought love meant sacrifice and compromise and making yourself smaller. But real love meant being seen fully and accepted completely. Forgiveness is a complicated thing, and I learned that it doesn't always mean reconciliation. I forgave Douglas for his passivity and his emotional absence, and we were rebuilding a relationship slowly. I forgave Preston for being part of Margot's world, even if he'd been a victim too. But I didn't forgive Barbara or Margot, and I didn't feel guilty about that. Forgiveness isn't mandatory, and some betrayals are too deep to come back from. I released my anger toward them, let go of the hope that they'd change, but I also released them from my life. They no longer had power over my emotions or my choices. Your worth isn't determined by family acceptance. This was perhaps the hardest and most important lesson. I'd spent 3 decades believing that if my family didn't value me, I must not have value. But I was wrong. My worth was inherent, not earned. It didn't depend on Barbara's approval or Margot's acceptance or anyone's validation except my own. I was worthy of love and respect and kindness, simply because I existed, because I was a human being doing my best. Once I truly believed that, everything else fell into place. Sometimes the family you build matters more than the family you're born into. Garrett, our daughter on the way, Preston, Simone, Diane, my real friends who'd stood by me through everything. These were my true family. They chose me every day. They showed up when things were hard. They celebrated my victories and mourned my losses, and loved me without conditions or expectations. Blood doesn't make you family. Love makes you family. Commitment makes you family. Showing up makes you family. I walked home through the city streets on a cold December afternoon, my hand resting on my small baby bump, feeling hope move inside me with tiny flutters that still amazed me every time. I called Garrett to tell him I was bringing dinner home, that I'd picked up Thai food from our favorite place. "I love you," I told him, and I heard the smile in his voice when he said it back. When I got home, he met me at the door with a kiss and took the takeout bags from my hands. We sat on our couch eating pad thai straight from the containers, talking about our days, planning for the nursery wed start setting up next month, discussing names and futures, and all the beautiful ordinary moments that make up a real life. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing for anyone. I wasn't trying to prove my worth or earn approval or make myself acceptable to people who would never truly accept me. I was just living, just being, just existing in this moment with this man I loved and this child wed, created together. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. So let me ask you, have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Have you dealt with family members who made you feel like you were never quite good enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I'd love to hear your stories and experiences. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about overcoming family drama and finding your own strength. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with toxic family dynamics. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there realize that you deserve better, that you're worth fighting for, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your value. Wishing you all the courage to set boundaries, the strength to stand up for yourselves, and the wisdom to know that your worth has never been up for debate. Take care of yourselves, and remember that you are enough exactly as you are.